this video, we're going to look at multiplying and dividing integers using a tic-tac-toe board. So what I have my students do is draw the same thing as a tic-tac-toe board, which this is kind of what a tic-tac-toe board looks like, right? Two lines going each way. But on the tic-tac-toe board, what we're going to do is we're going to put positive signs on this diagonal right here. Okay? So we're going to put a positive on this diagonal going down, and then we're going to fill everything else in with negative signs. Okay? Now, if you don't want to draw the board that way, you could just do this. Positive, 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 negative, 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 negative. Okay? Now, what's happening here is this final column would be the product if you were multiplying. So if I take a positive times a negative, I get a negative. If I take a negative times a positive, I get a negative. And if I take a negative times a negative, I get a positive. And really what's happening here is this. If you are multiplying two numbers, now it's different if you have more than two numbers, but if you have two numbers, okay, and the two numbers have different signs, then your answer is negative. Now, if you have two numbers and they have the same sign, then your answer is going to be positive. Because I didn't write it with a tic-tac-toe board, but what you've done your whole life is positive times positive is positive, okay? But we know that one, so usually just writing the tic-tac-toe board is what will be helpful for us. So let's make some examples. All right, let's take a -5 times a -3. Well, what I tell my students is before they do a series of questions like this is to go ahead and make their tic-tac-toe board. So the pluses are on the diagonal, and then you have minus, 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 minus. And remember, we don't usually write it, but you know, positive times positive is positive also. All right, so I have 3 times 5, that's 15. I have a negative times a negative. Well, negative times negative is positive. That is a positive 15. If I had a positive 5 times a -3, 3 times 5 is 15, but now I have a positive times a negative, and positive times negative gives me a negative answer. So this is different from the integer rules for addition. For addition, if you have teamwork or battle, your stronger number is going to determine the sign. And that's not what happens in multiplication. In multiplication, it strictly comes down to if one is positive and one is negative, you will have a negative answer. So if I had, let's say, a -6 times a -4, I have a negative times a negative, my answer is going to be positive. 6 times 4 is 24. If I have a positive 6, let's do this. I have a -6 times a positive 4. I now have a -24 because I have a negative and a positive. So then it becomes, well, what do we do if we have more complex answers or more complex problems? So again, let's draw our tic-tac-toe board, positive on the diagonal, and then negative, 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 negative. All right. And let's say I have this problem here. I have a -3 times a positive 4 times a -2. All right. Now I've got order of operations kind of coming into play here. So let's do a -3 times a positive 4. Well, a negative times a positive times a positive is a negative. So that's going to be a -12 times a -2. Well, I have a negative times a negative. That's going to give me a positive value, and 12 times 2 is 24. So you need to use your tic-tac-toe board for every pair of numbers that you come across, because it works with two numbers at a time. So let's try one more. Let's try a +5 times a -2 times a -3. Okay, and again, our tic-tac-toe board, we have our positives on the diagonal surrounded by negatives. Okay, so let's take this one piece at a time. 5 times a negative 2, that's going to be a negative 10, because a positive times a negative is negative. Then I have a negative 10 times a negative 3. Well, negative times a negative is a positive. This becomes a positive 30. All right, well, we haven't really talked about division yet, so let's talk about division next. And again, tic-tac-toe board, 3 positives on the diagonal, everything else is negatives. So if I have a negative 24 divided by a positive 8, I have a negative 24 divided by a positive 8, my answer will be negative. That's going to be a negative 3. If I had a positive 18 divided by 2, let's make that a negative 2. Positive 18 divided by negative 2. I have a positive 18 divided by negative 2. That's going to give me a negative 9. And if I had a negative 20 divided by a negative 4, I have a negative divided by negative. It's going to give me a positive 5. So the tic-tac-toe board works whether you're dealing with multiplication or division, but you use it with 2 numbers at a time.